Reddit by Reddit recap. Employers of Reddit. What is the most inappropriate piece of clothing someone has worn to an job interview? I worked with a guy who applied to the local big city fire department. Apparently all candidates had to submit a passport type photo of themselves, although I failed to see how that's relevant. Diversity quota perhaps? Anyways, this guy was a gym nut and also sent a full head and torso photo of himself, with no shirt on. When I asked him why, he replied, "So they know I'm not a twink." Well, it must have worked, as Twinkie is now a firefighter. Fellow I knew was the counselor at the unemployment center. He said he had to explain to one guy he was coaching for job interviews. "Don't wear that hat that says beer makes me smart." I saw one guy come from the country club pool in an American flag tank top and swim trunks to the club's golf cart boy interview. He didn't get the job and then came back a week later in a full suit apologizing for his previous attire. Someone got lectured by their mom, or lost a bet. Had a candidate come in for a recruiting role. She was young and beautiful, but she was wearing some of the tightest yoga pants ever. Nothing was left to the imagination. Her top looked great though. Had the same happen. Young, attractive, yoga pants that seemed painted on. College hoodie. 2 of 5 on her interview loop were women, one being a manager. She absolutely aced the interview. Nobody said a ducking thing about the yoga pants. We hired her. A tight muscle shirt. It's great that you work out. Big guy, but it's not a gym. Plus he only worked his glamour muscles. He was thick around the middle. Dude, at least give the office a show. My master's student came to defend his thesis barefooted because his slippers got wet. Edit. This was in Estonia. I've never had to deal with inappropriate clothing at an interview before, but, and probably worse, I did have to try to explain away to elected officials and citizens at a public consultation meeting why the engineering consultant we contracted out for a portion of developing that town's strategic plan showed up in a ducking Hawaiian shirt and flip-flops. Reason I gave: he wanted to stand out and field as many questions as possible by sticking out like a sore thumb and seeming approachable. Real reason: this was his last gig before retirement, so he had zero ducks. And he had just signed his divorce papers that morning and spent the afternoon drinking at the hotel bar with his lawyer. Unducking real. Nothing in his contract dictated anything about attire, since 99% of what he was paid to do was going to be done from his winter place in Arizona. Only that he would be expected to show up at any public consultations. You better ducking believe our standard contracts going forward included a clause on it. It wasn't so much of inappropriate clothing. It was more the action of uncrossing her legs very wide while wearing a short skirt, meanwhile never taking her eyes off mine. Yeah, she was an HR nightmare waiting to happen. I interviewed a young woman who wore a skirt so short I did actually see her underwear when she sat down. The underwear was pink. I gave her feedback later that she should have worn a suit. This was for a business analyst role. Everyone else was wearing a suit. One time I was having dinner in a restaurant and saw a young woman come up to the counter and ask for a job application. The employees gave her one and she sat down near me to fill it out. This is when I noticed she was wearing a cap with a huge pot leaf on it. She finished it, returned it to the counter, and asked what the follow-up would be. The employee said, "We'll contact you in a few days for an interview, and when you come back, don't wear that hat." I was the person. This was 20 years ago, and I had just moved to the city. I was 17 and spent 3 weeks working as a hostess at Denny's. A friend asked if I wanted to go rollerblading, so I was strapped into my rollerblades and was wearing athletic wear. She then pulled up to her gym, had me walk in my rollerblades up to the second story where the daycare was, and told me that I was interviewing for the nanny job that she heard was available. I actually got the job because the woman who owned the gym was impressed that I could climb stairs in my rollerblades. A guy showed up in flip-flops, cargo shorts and a tank top. Ended up being the best interview of the day by miles. Ended up one of the best people I ever hired. I still don't recommend anyone do this, but it has worked. Edit. This happened in Atlanta, GA. So completely unrelated to the other story in this thread. Programmer? Yep. Oh, so he was dressed up. I have one from just last month. This guy was coming in to interview for a financial advisor program. Everyone in our office dresses very professional, and most people I interview are dressed in their best suits. This gentleman came in wearing a stained white dress shirt with a yellow tinted white undershirt. I forget what kind of pants, but he had a cloth Joker belt. Why so serious written all over it with a Joker's face in green and black that he didn't loop through the rest of his pants and was swaying around when walking. He also had very long creepy fingernails that were very dirty and he kept rolling and rubbing his fingers together to get the dirt off subconsciously. The icing on the cake was he coughed and snorted something up very loudly, then swallowed it, then loudly commented nice. Somehow this guy aced our assessments and put together a great resume, but was just the exact opposite of professional. We are still not sure if he was trying to duck with us, or was that terribly oblivious. I just assumed he was interviewing for someone else, like Ben Affleck in Good Will Hunting. I worked in the US Senate a couple years back. We were interviewing about half a dozen candidates for a pretty junior position. One of the interviewees was wearing a Harvard t-shirt, a Harvard jacket, and Harvard sweatpants. We were astounded. The first question my co-worker asked was, "Did you go to Harvard?" The guy did, and he handled the rest of the interview surprisingly well. He didn't get the job, but he did become a running joke in the office for a while. A few years back, I had someone show up fresh out of the swimming pool, hair wet, bathing suit and cover up on, still wet, hadn't taken the time to dry off. I went through the interview and a test simulation of the job with her. She actually did very well at the simulation. When I took her to see my boss, that made the ultimate decision. He took one look and said no. Didn't ask about the simulation or anything. Just no. Edit. 1. Not a lifeguard position. It was for a small textile company that manufactures clean room supplies. 2. Boss was a complete C. I have numerous stories about why he did and didn't hire someone after I did initial interview assessment. An extremely short dress, but I ended up hiring her because she had experience. Turned out she was pregnant, coming from school, and her husband had met her at the interview site so she could change clothes, and that is what he had brought. She was so embarrassed, but did not have time to go home and change into something else. She ended up being the best worker I had ever hired. Don't judge a book by its cover. He came into the IT interview in polo, khakis and aqua-colored Crocs with an anime-made blushing painted on one and lining up a sniper shot on the other. He was late because security was concerned about his MLP chain wallet. Here we see the wild weeaboo released from captivity, searching for a way to survive. Late to the party, but I had a young guy come in one day who I think was clearly trying to not get the job. Like his dad gave him an ultimatum to get a job or get out type of thing, and he was just going to interviews to appease him. He had his hair in pigtails high on the sides of his head with wire threaded in them so they'd stick out. Black t-shirt that said duck on it in giant white letters. Plaid schoolgirl style skirt. Rainbow tights. 90s chunky club kid style shoes. PJs. She was pulled out of bed and brought to me and my boss for her interview she didn't know she was having. After 5 minutes we offered her a job and she actually turned out really well. I would like to know more. This sounds like an interesting story. I was working at a fast food restaurant as an assistant manager. My boss and I were trying to find a new closer. An old friend of mine who I was out of touch with was looking for a new job so she could leave one she was at. I asked her brother to take her application to her and bring it back filled out with her. He woke her up, let her fill it out and brought her to the store in her PJs. Me and my boss talked to her at the front counter about her experience in fast food. My boss and I exchanged a smile knowing we wanted her. My boss looked at her and asked how long she will need to give notice. My friend unsure everything explained she needed to know if she had the job and asked when she would sit for her interview. Almost in unison my boss and I said, "You just had the interview." She started with us 2 weeks later. Homecoming dress. She knew she was supposed to dress up for the interview, and that was the nicest thing she had. I felt so bad. She was incredibly embarrassed. It was her first real interview, and in the end I gave her credit for at least putting in the effort. Edit. For everyone asking, yes, she did get a job offer. The attire didn't factor in nearly as much as her coming in prepared, on time, and with questions. Best comment of the day. I was in a minor car accident on my way to an interview once. The damage to her car was a lot worse than mine, and she admitted it has her fault anyway. I explained I had an important meeting I could not be late for, so we just exchanged information and I continued to my interview, while she called a tow truck. At the time cell phones were still a bit unusual, though they were gaining popularity quickly. As I walked into the office, the receptionist was on the phone, so I sat down and waited for her to finish. The receptionist can be a deciding factor. Never be rude to the receptionist. She finished her call and explained something had come up and my interview would take place later. She asked if I could come back in about 2 hours. I said it would be fine, and she gave me $10 for lunch. Had a nice lunch and went back for the interview. The person interviewing me was the woman who had rear-ended me. I'm so glad I wasn't an asshole after the accident.